I always thought the end of my story would be quiet. I pictured myself in the old house, sunlight slanting through the kitchen window, the kettle whistling, the radio playing some song from my youth. I imagined the days would be slow and gentle, the kind of days where you can hear the clock ticking and the birds outside, and you have time to remember every good thing that ever happened to you. I never thought the end of my story would begin with a single sentence from my only son, spoken so casually over a cup of coffee that it took me a full minute to realize what he'd said. "You're too old to live alone, Dad." He said it with a smile, as if he was offering me a gift, as if he was doing me a favor. I looked at him across the table, at the man I'd raised, the man who used to run through the backyard with grass stains on his knees and a wild, hopeful look in his eyes. Now he wore a suit that cost more than my first car, and his hair was always perfect, and his phone never left his hand. He was a good man, I told myself. He was just worried. But the words stung. They stung in a way I couldn't explain. Not even to myself. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the steam rising from my mug, watched it curl and vanish. I thought about the house, my house, the place where I'd lived for 47 years. The place where my wife and I had built a life, raised a child, buried a dog, planted a garden, and watched the world change around us. Every corner of that house held a memory. The scratch on the banister from the time my son tried to ride his skateboard down the stairs. The faded patch on the living room wall where our wedding photo used to hang. The kitchen drawer that always stuck no matter how many times I fixed it. It was all mine. It was all I had left. But my son didn't see any of that. He saw an old man, alone in a creaking house, one bad fall away from disaster. He saw risk. He saw inconvenience. He saw a problem to be solved. "Dad, I'm serious," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You can't keep living here by yourself. What if something happens? What if you fall or get sick or—" He stopped, searching for the right words. "I just want you to be safe." Safe. That word echoed in my mind for days. Safe. As if safety was the only thing left to want. As if comfort and dignity and independence were luxuries I could no longer afford. I didn't argue. I didn't protest. I just nodded and told him I'd think about it. He seemed relieved, as if he'd just crossed something off a long, unpleasant to-do list. He hugged me before he left, but it felt like a formality, a gesture he'd learned from some article about how to care for aging parents. I watched him drive away, his car disappearing down the street, and I stood in the doorway for a long time, listening to the silence of the house settle around me like dust. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. I thought about all the things I'd lost over the years, my wife, my friends, my strength, my certainty. I thought about the things I still had, my memories, my stubbornness, my house. I thought about what it meant to be old and what it meant to be alone and whether those two things were really as dangerous as everyone seemed to think. I remembered something my father used to say, back when I was a boy and the world was still wide open. "You don't get to choose how you leave this world, son, but you get to choose how you live in it." I wondered if that was still true. The next morning, I made a decision. I got up before dawn, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with a pen and a pad of paper. I wrote a list of everything I would need to do if I wanted to leave. Not just the house, but everything, my life as it was. I wrote down the names of people I would need to call, the things I would need to pack, the accounts I would need to close. I wrote down the places I might go, the things I might do, the person I might become if I wasn't just Dad or Grandpa or the old man who lives at the end of the street. I didn't tell my son. I didn't tell anyone. I just started doing the things on my list, one by one, as quietly as I could. I called a realtor and asked her to come by the house. She was young and efficient, with a bright smile and a clipboard full of forms. She walked through the rooms, making notes, asking questions, barely glancing at the photos on the walls or the worn spots on the carpet. She told me the market was good, that I could get a fair price, that it wouldn't take long. I nodded and signed the papers. I started packing my things. Not everything, just the things that mattered. A box of old letters, a stack of photographs, my wife's wedding ring, my father's watch, a few books I couldn't bear to leave behind, I gave away the rest. I donated the furniture to a charity, left the dishes in the cupboards, told the neighbors I was downsizing. They nodded and smiled and wished me well, but I could see the questions in their eyes. Where would I go? What would I do? Was I all right? I told them I was fine. I told them I was ready for a new adventure. I told them I was looking forward to the next chapter. But the truth was, I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I couldn't stay. I couldn't let my son decide how my story would end. The day the house sold, I stood in the empty living room and listened to the echo of my own footsteps. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the sound of my wife's laughter, the smell of her perfume, the way the sunlight used to fall across the floor in the late afternoon. I tried to hold on to those things, to carry them with me, but they slipped through my fingers like water. I left the keys on the kitchen counter and walked out the front door without looking back. I didn't leave a note. I didn't call my son. I just disappeared. I didn't have a plan. Not really. I had a suitcase, a wallet, and a mind full of memories that felt heavier than anything I could pack. The bus station was nearly empty when I arrived. The kind of place that smells like old coffee and rain, where the only people awake at that hour are the ones with nowhere else to be. I bought a ticket for the first bus leaving town, not caring where it was headed. The woman behind the counter looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and pity, as if she could see right through me, as if she knew I was running from something I couldn't name. The bus rumbled through the darkness, headlights carving tunnels in the fog. I sat by the window, watching the world slip past in a blur of shadows and streetlights. I thought about calling my son, about telling him where I was, about explaining why I had to go. But every time I reached for my phone, I remembered the look on his face when he told me I was too old to live alone. I remembered the way he spoke to me, gentle but patronizing, as if I were a child who couldn't be trusted with sharp objects. I remembered the way he looked past me, through me, as if I were already halfway gone. I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to be a problem to be solved. I wanted to be a person, with choices and secrets, and a life that belonged to me. So I turned off my phone and watched the miles unspool behind me, each one a thread tying me to a past I was finally ready to leave behind. The bus stopped in a small town I'd never heard of, a place with a single traffic light and a diner that never closed. I got off, stretching my legs, feeling the stiffness in my knees and the ache in my back. I walked down the main street, past shuttered shops and faded signs, until I found a motel with a vacancy sign flickering in the window. The woman at the front desk didn't ask any questions. She handed me a key and pointed down the hall. The room was small and clean, with a bed that creaked and a window that looked out over the parking lot. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the hum of the air conditioner, the distant sound of a train passing through the night. For the first time in years, I felt invisible. Not in the way I'd felt at home, surrounded by people who saw only my age, my frailty, my limitations. Here, I was just another traveler, another stranger passing through. It was a strange kind of freedom, and it scared me more than I expected. The next morning, I walked to the diner and ordered a cup of coffee. The waitress was young, with tired eyes and a quick smile. She called me Hon and filled my cup without asking. I watched the other customers, truck drivers, old men reading newspapers, a mother with a baby on her hip. No one paid me any mind. I was just another face in the crowd, and for the first time in a long time, I liked it that way. I spent the day wandering the town, learning its rhythms. I found a park with a pond and a bench beneath a willow tree. I sat there for hours, watching the ducks glide across the water, listening to the wind in the branches. I thought about my wife, about the way she used to laugh at the ducks in our own backyard, about the way she'd squeeze my hand when she was happy. I missed her so much it hurt, a dull ache that never quite went away. As the sun set, I walked back to the motel, my steps slow but steady. I felt lighter somehow, as if I'd shed a layer of skin I no longer needed. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time I was curious. I was alive. That night I dreamed of the house. I saw it as it was when we first bought it. Empty rooms, bare walls, the promise of a future we hadn't yet imagined. I saw my wife, young and laughing, her hair shining in the sunlight. I saw my son, a little boy with wide eyes and sticky hands, running through the halls. I woke with tears on my cheeks, but I didn't feel sad. I felt grateful. I'd had a good life, a full life, and now I had a chance to live it on my own terms. The days passed in a gentle blur. I settled into a routine: coffee at the diner, walks in the park, evenings spent reading in my motel room. I started to recognize faces, to nod at the people I passed on the street. I was still a stranger, but I was no longer invisible. I was becoming part of the town, in my own quiet way. One afternoon, as I sat on the bench by the pond, a man about my age sat down beside me. He wore a battered baseball cap and smelled faintly of pipe tobacco. We sat in silence for a while, watching the ducks. Finally, he spoke. "You new in town?" he asked, his voice rough but kind. I nodded. "Just passing through, I guess." He smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "Aren't we all?" We talked for a while, about nothing and everything. He told me about his wife, gone 5 years now, about his daughter who lived in the city, about the way the town had changed over the years. I listened, grateful for the company, for the chance to share a little of my own story. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he stood and stretched. "Well, I'll see you around," he said. "Take care of yourself." I watched him walk away, feeling a warmth in my chest I hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. The next morning, I woke to the sound of rain tapping against the motel window. It was a soft, steady rain, the kind that makes you want to stay in bed a little longer, to savor the warmth and the quiet. I lay there for a while, listening, letting my mind wander. I thought about the man from the park, about the easy way he'd shared his story, about the comfort of sitting beside someone who understood what it meant to lose and to keep going anyway. I wondered if I'd see him again, if we'd become friends, or if we'd just remain two old men passing each other in the slow current of small-town life. Eventually, I got up and dressed, pulling on my jacket and hat. The air outside was cool and fresh, the rain washing the dust from the streets. I walked to the diner, my steps splashing in the puddles, and found my usual seat by the window. The waitress greeted me with a smile and a steaming cup of coffee, and I thanked her, feeling a little more at home with each passing day. As I sipped my coffee, I watched the town wake up. People hurried past, umbrellas bobbing, children splashing in the gutters, shopkeepers unlocking their doors. There was a rhythm to it, a sense of purpose and belonging that I envied. I wondered if I could ever find a place for myself here, if I could become more than just a visitor. After breakfast, I wandered through the town, letting my feet guide me. I found a small library tucked between a bakery and a hardware store. The sign in the window read, "Open." So I stepped inside, breathing in the familiar scent of old paper and polished wood. The librarian, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, looked up from her desk and smiled. "Can I help you find something?" she asked. I shook my head. "Just looking, thank you." She nodded and returned to her work, leaving me to explore. I wandered the aisles, running my fingers along the spines of books, letting the titles and authors stir old memories. I found a novel I'd loved as a young man, its cover worn and faded, and settled into a chair by the window to read. The hours slipped by unnoticed, the rain tapping a gentle rhythm on the glass. When I finally looked up, the library was nearly empty. The librarian approached, her footsteps soft on the carpet. "You're welcome to stay as long as you like," she said. "We don't get many visitors on rainy days." I smiled, grateful for her kindness. "Thank you. It's a good place to be." She hesitated, then sat in the chair across from me. "You're new here, aren't you?" I nodded. "Just arrived a few days ago." She studied me for a moment, her gaze gentle but searching. "Sometimes people come here to start over," she said quietly. "Sometimes they're running from something. Sometimes they're just looking for a place to rest." I looked down at my hands, unsure how much to share. "Maybe a little of all three," I admitted. She smiled, a small, understanding smile. "Well, you're welcome here, whatever the reason." We talked for a while, about books and the town and the weather. She told me about the library's history, about the people who came and went, about the way the town had changed over the years. I listened, grateful for the conversation, for the sense of connection. When I left, the rain had stopped, and the sun was breaking through the clouds. I walked back to the motel, feeling lighter, as if the weight I'd been carrying had shifted, just a little. That evening, I sat on the bed and looked through the box of memories I'd brought with me. I found a photograph of my wife, taken on our wedding day, her smile bright and full of hope. I traced her face with my finger, remembering the way she used to laugh, the way she'd squeeze my hand when she was nervous, the way she'd look at me as if I were the only person in the world. I missed her more than I could say, but I also felt her presence, a quiet strength that steadied me, that reminded me I was still here, still capable of living, still able to choose my own path. As night fell, I sat by the window and watched the lights of the town flicker on, one by one. I thought about the life I'd left behind, about the house and the memories, and the son who thought he knew what was best for me. I wondered if he was worried, if he missed me, if he understood why I had to go. I didn't have any answers, but for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with the questions. The next morning, I woke before dawn, the sky outside my window still a deep, velvety blue. I sat up slowly, feeling the familiar stiffness in my joints, and listened to the quiet. There was a comfort in the silence, a sense of possibility that I hadn't felt in years. I made myself a cup of instant coffee with a little kettle in my room and sat at the small table, watching the first hints of sunlight creep across the parking lot. I thought about the day ahead, about the simple freedom of not having anywhere I needed to be, no one expecting anything from me. It was a strange feeling, both exhilarating and a little frightening. After a while, I dressed and headed out, deciding to explore a part of town I hadn't seen yet. The streets were empty, the air crisp and clean. I passed a bakery just as the owner was unlocking the door, the smell of fresh bread drifting out into the morning. I bought a roll and ate it as I walked, savoring the warmth and the taste, letting it remind me of Saturday mornings with my wife, when we'd sit at the kitchen table and share pastries and stories. I wandered until I found myself at the edge of town, where the houses grew farther apart and the fields stretched out toward the horizon. I stood for a long time, watching the sun rise over the fields, the light turning the grass to gold. I felt small and insignificant, but also strangely powerful, as if I were part of something larger than myself. I thought about all the places I'd been, all the things I'd seen, and realized that I still had time for more. I wasn't finished yet. On my way back, I passed a small community center with a sign in the window advertising a weekly breakfast for seniors. I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to be part of a group, unsure if I was ready to let anyone else into the quiet world I was building for myself. But something drew me in, a curiosity or maybe just a hunger for connection. Inside, the room was bright and cheerful, filled with the sound of laughter and the clatter of dishes. People sat at long tables, sharing stories and passing plates of eggs and toast. I stood awkwardly by the door until a woman with a kind face and a shock of white hair waved me over. "Don't be shy," she said, her voice warm and welcoming. "There's always room for one more." I sat down and introduced myself, and soon I was swept up in the easy conversation, the gentle teasing, the sense of belonging. I listened more than I spoke, but no one seemed to mind. They told me about their lives, their families, their memories of the town. I found myself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in what felt like years. After breakfast, I helped clear the tables, enjoying the simple pleasure of being useful. The woman who'd invited me over, her name was Ruth, asked if I'd be coming back next week. I told her I thought I might. She smiled and patted my hand. "We're glad to have you," she said. "It's good to see a new face." Walking back to the motel, I felt a sense of contentment settle over me. I realized that I was starting to put down roots, however tentative. I was becoming part of the fabric of the town, weaving my story into the stories of the people around me. That afternoon, I returned to the library, where the librarian greeted me by name. I spent hours lost in books, letting the words transport me to other worlds, other lives. I found myself drawn to stories of adventure and reinvention, of people who started over when they thought their lives were finished. I wondered if I was becoming one of those people, if I was writing a new chapter for myself. As evening fell, I walked back to the park and sat on the bench beneath the willow tree. The man with the baseball cap was there again, and we nodded to each other in companionable silence. We watched the ducks, the sky turning pink and gold above us. After a while, he spoke. "You look different," he said, "happier." I smiled, surprised by the truth of his words. "I think I am." He nodded, as if he understood exactly what I meant. It's never too late, you know, to start over, to find something new. We sat together until the sun disappeared, and the first stars appeared in the sky. When I finally stood to leave, I felt lighter, as if I'd left something behind on that bench, a burden I no longer needed to carry. Back in my room, I called up an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. We talked for hours, reminiscing about the past, laughing about old times. When I hung up, I felt a sense of connection, a reminder that I wasn't as alone as I sometimes felt. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about my son, about the words that had sent me on this journey. I wondered if he would ever understand why I had to go, if he would forgive me for leaving without a word. I hoped he would. But even if he didn't, I knew I had made the right choice for both of us. The next week unfolded with a gentle rhythm, each day blending into the next in a way that felt both comforting and new. I found myself looking forward to small things, the smell of fresh coffee at the diner, the way the sunlight filtered through the library windows, the sound of children laughing in the park. I was learning the names of the people I saw each day: Ruth from the community center, Ed the man with the baseball cap, Mrs. Callahan the librarian. They greeted me with nods and smiles, and I began to feel less like a stranger and more like a neighbor. One morning, as I sat in the diner with my usual cup of coffee, Ruth slid into the booth across from me. She wore a bright yellow scarf and a mischievous grin. "You're coming to bingo tonight, aren't you?" she asked, as if it were already decided. I hesitated, but she waved away my uncertainty. "Don't worry. It's not about the game. It's about the company. Besides, we need someone new to shake up the luck." I found myself agreeing, and that evening I walked to the community center, feeling a little nervous but mostly curious. The room was filled with laughter and the clatter of bingo balls, the air thick with the scent of coffee and cookies. I sat at a table with Ruth and Ed, who winked at me as he arranged his cards. The game was simple, but the real joy was in the banter, the teasing, the stories that flowed between numbers. I listened as Ruth recounted tales of her late husband's fishing adventures, as Ed described the time he'd accidentally driven his tractor into the mayor's flower bed. I shared a few stories of my own, about my wife's legendary apple pie, about the time my son tried to build a treehouse and ended up with a pile of splintered boards and a black eye. The others laughed, and I felt a warmth spread through me, a sense of belonging I hadn't realized I'd been missing. After bingo, we lingered over coffee, talking about everything and nothing. Ruth asked about my family, and I hesitated before telling her about my son, about the conversation that had set me on this path. She listened without judgment, her eyes kind and understanding. "It's hard, isn't it?" she said softly, "letting go of the life you knew, but sometimes it's the only way to find out who you are now." Her words stayed with me as I walked back to the motel, the night air cool and sweet. I thought about the life I'd left behind, about the house and the memories and the son who thought he was protecting me. I wondered if he was searching for me, if he was angry or afraid or simply relieved. I wondered if I would ever see him again. The next day I received a letter at the motel. The envelope was plain, the handwriting unfamiliar. Inside was a note from the realtor who had sold my house. She wrote to let me know that the new owners had moved in, that they were a young family with 2 children and a dog. She said they loved the garden, that the little boy had already claimed the tree in the backyard as his own. She thanked me for trusting her with the sale, for making it possible for another family to build their own memories in the house I had called home for so long. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in my box of keepsakes. I felt a pang of loss, but also a sense of peace. The house was no longer mine, but it was still alive, still filled with laughter and love. That was enough. As the days passed, I found myself growing stronger, more confident. I started volunteering at the library, shelving books and reading to children during story hour. I joined a walking group that met every Saturday morning, exploring the trails that wound through the fields and woods around town. I even started writing again, filling a notebook with memories and reflections, with stories I'd never told anyone. One afternoon, as I sat in the park with Ed, he turned to me and said, "You know, you're not the same man who showed up here a few weeks ago. You've got a spark now, like you remembered something important." I smiled, realizing he was right. I had remembered something important. I had remembered how to live. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about my son. I wondered if he would ever understand why I had to leave, if he would forgive me for disappearing without a word. I hoped he would, but even if he didn't, I knew I had given both of us a gift, the chance to start over, to find our own way. The seasons began to change, and with them, so did I. The leaves on the trees turned from green to gold, then to a deep, burning red. The air grew crisp, and the mornings were laced with fog that curled around the rooftops and drifted through the empty streets. I found myself waking earlier, drawn outside by the quiet beauty of autumn. I walked the town's winding paths, my breath visible in the cold air, and felt a sense of gratitude for the simple fact of being alive. At the library, Mrs. Callahan asked if I would help organize a book sale. I agreed, and soon found myself sorting through boxes of donated books, each one a small piece of someone's life. There were cookbooks with handwritten notes in the margins, children's stories with crayon marks on the pages, old mysteries with brittle yellowed covers. I thought about the people who had owned these books, about the hands that had turned their pages, the eyes that had scanned their words. I wondered what stories I would leave behind when I was gone. The book sale was a success. The whole town seemed to turn out, filling the library with laughter and conversation. I watched as children tugged at their parents' sleeves, begging for just one more book, as teenagers browsed the shelves with shy curiosity, as older couples reminisced over novels they'd read together decades ago. I felt a quiet pride in having helped create something that brought people together, even if only for an afternoon. After the sale, Ruth invited me to her house for dinner. Her home was small and cozy, filled with photographs and the scent of something delicious simmering on the stove. We ate at her kitchen table, sharing stories and memories, the conversation easy and unhurried. She told me about her late husband, about the years they'd spent traveling the country in a battered old camper, about the way he used to sing to her when he thought no one was listening. I told her about my wife, about the garden we'd planted together, about the nights we'd spent sitting on the porch watching the stars. As the evening wore on, Ruth poured us each a cup of tea and asked, "Do you ever regret leaving?" I thought about her question for a long moment. I thought about the house, about my son, about the life I'd left behind. I thought about the loneliness and the fear, about the sense of being invisible in my own home. I thought about the freedom I'd found here, about the friends I'd made, about the person I was becoming. "No," I said finally. "I miss what I had, but I don't regret leaving. I needed to find out who I was without all the things I'd built my life around. I needed to prove to myself that I could still change, still grow." Ruth nodded, her eyes shining with understanding. "It takes courage to start over," she said. "Most people never do." Quote. We sat in comfortable silence, the only sound the ticking of the old clock on the wall. I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a sense that I was exactly where I was meant to be. As I walked home that night, the sky was clear and filled with stars. I looked up, searching for the constellations my wife had loved, and felt her presence beside me, as real as the chill in the air. I whispered a quiet thank you, unsure if I was speaking to her, to the universe, or to myself. The next morning, I received a letter from my son. The envelope was thick, the handwriting careful and precise. My hands trembled as I opened it, unsure what I would find inside. The letter was long, filled with apologies and questions, with memories and regrets. He wrote about the day I left, about the shock and the fear, about the anger that had given way to worry, and, finally, to understanding. He wrote about his own struggles, about the pressure he felt to protect me, about the ways he had failed to see me as a person, and not just as his father. He asked if I was safe, if I was happy, if I would ever come home. I read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the words. I wanted to call him, to tell him I was all right, to reassure him that I hadn't left out of anger or spite. But I also knew that I needed more time, that I wasn't ready to return to the life I'd left behind. I wrote him a short note in reply, telling him that I was safe, that I was finding my way, that I loved him. I promised to write again soon. As I sealed the envelope, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I realized that I didn't have to choose between the past and the future, that I could carry both with me as I moved forward. I was still a father, still a husband, still the man I had always been, but I was also someone new, someone braver and more open than I had ever imagined. Winter arrived quietly, almost shyly at first, a thin frost on the grass, a chill in the air that lingered long after the sun had risen. The days grew shorter, the nights longer, and the town seemed to draw inward, lights glowing in windows, smoke curling from chimneys. I found myself slowing down, savoring the warmth of the diner, the hush of the library, the comfort of familiar faces. There was a hush to everything, a sense of waiting, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I spent more time indoors, reading by the window as snow began to fall, soft and silent, blanketing the town in white. The first real snowstorm came in the middle of the night. I woke to the sound of wind rattling the window pane, the world outside transformed by morning into something clean and new. I bundled up and walked to the park, my boots crunching in the fresh snow, the air sharp and bright in my lungs. Children were already out, their laughter ringing through the cold as they built snowmen and hurled snowballs, their cheeks red with excitement. At the community center, Ruth organized a holiday potluck. The room was filled with the smells of roasting meat and baking bread, the tables crowded with casseroles and pies. People brought their favorite dishes, recipes handed down through generations, each one a story in itself. I made my wife's famous apple pie, the recipe written in her careful script on a faded index card. As I mixed the dough, I felt her hands guiding mine, her laughter echoing in my memory. The pie was a hit, and I found myself telling the story of how she'd perfected the recipe, how she'd insisted on using only the tartest apples, how she'd always cut a little heart in the crust. After dinner, we sang carols around the piano, our voices rising together in the warm, bright room. I watched the faces around me, Ruth, Ed, Mrs. Callahan, the children from the library, and felt a sense of belonging deeper than anything I'd known in years. I realized that I had become part of this place, that my story was now woven into the fabric of the town. One evening, as I walked home through the snow, I saw a figure waiting outside the motel. For a moment, I thought I was imagining things, but as I drew closer, I recognized my son. He stood with his hands in his pockets, his breath visible in the cold air, his eyes searching the darkness. "Dad," he said, his voice uncertain. I didn't know where else to look. I stopped a few feet away, my heart pounding. I hadn't expected to see him. Not yet, maybe not ever. We stood in silence, the snow falling softly around us, the world hushed and still. "I got your letter," he said. I needed to see for myself. I needed to know you were really okay." I nodded, unsure what to say. There was so much between us. Words unspoken, wounds unhealed, love that had been buried beneath worry and fear. He stepped closer, his eyes shining with tears. "I'm sorry, Dad. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting you. But I see now. I was just scared of losing you, scared of being alone." I reached out and put a hand on his shoulder, feeling the familiar weight of him, the boy and the man all at once. "We're both scared," I said quietly, "but we can't let fear decide how we live." He nodded, wiping his eyes. "Can I stay for a while? Just be with you?" I smiled, the tension easing from my chest. "Of course. There's always room." We walked inside together, the warmth of the motel, a welcome embrace. We sat and talked late into the night, sharing stories, laughter, and tears. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole. The next morning, we walked through the snowy streets, side by side. I showed him the places I'd come to love, the diner, the library, the park. I introduced him to Ruth and Ed, to Mrs. Callahan and the children at the library. He listened, asked questions, and I saw something shift in him, a new respect, a new understanding. That evening, as we sat by the window watching the snow fall, he turned to me and said, "I get it now, Dad. I get why you had to leave. You weren't running away. You were running toward something, toward yourself." I nodded, feeling a deep sense of peace. "We all have to find our own way," I said, "no matter how old we are." He smiled, and for the first time in years, I saw the boy he used to be, the boy who believed in adventure, in possibility, in the magic of starting over. Spring arrived slowly, as if the world itself was waking from a long, deep sleep. The snow melted in patches, revealing the first hints of green beneath the brown grass. Buds appeared on the trees, and the air grew softer, scented with the promise of rain and new beginnings. I found myself walking more, drawn outside by the gentle warmth of the sun, the sound of birds returning to the park. My son stayed on, at first just for a few days, then a week, then longer. He rented a small room above the bakery, saying he needed time to think, to breathe, to figure out what came next. I didn't press him. We settled into a quiet routine, meeting for breakfast at the diner, walking together in the evenings, sharing stories and silences in equal measure. One morning as we sat by the window, he asked, "Do you ever wish you'd done things differently?" His question caught me off guard, and for a moment I didn't know how to answer. I thought about the choices I'd made, the paths I'd taken, the regrets I carried like stones in my pockets. I thought about my wife, about the years we'd shared, about the mistakes and the joys and the ordinary days that made up a life. "I think everyone wishes that sometimes," I said finally. "But if I'd done things differently, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have met these people, seen this town, found this peace." Regret is just another way of holding on to the past. I'm learning to let go. He nodded, looking out at the street, his face thoughtful. "I'm trying to do that too. It's harder than I thought." Quote, "We finished our coffee in companionable silence, the kind that only comes when words are no longer necessary." Later that day, we joined Ruth and Ed for a picnic in the park. The grass was soft and damp, the trees just beginning to bloom. We spread a blanket beneath the willow tree and shared sandwiches and stories, laughter rising into the clear blue sky. My son listened as Ruth told tales of her travels, as Ed recounted the misadventures of his youth. He asked questions, genuinely curious, and I saw him relax, saw the lines of worry fade from his face. After lunch, we walked along the river, the water high and fast with the spring melt. My son skipped stones across the surface, just as he had when he was a boy. I watched him, remembering the child he'd been, the man he was becoming. I felt a surge of pride, not for his accomplishments or his career, but for his willingness to change, to grow, to admit when he was wrong. That evening, as we sat on the steps of the motel, he turned to me and said, "I think I want to stay. Not forever, maybe, but for a while. I want to see what life is like when I'm not rushing, not trying to control everything. I want to learn how to just be." I smiled, feeling a quiet joy. "You're always welcome here. This place has a way of teaching you what matters." The days grew longer, the air warmer. The town came alive with the energy of spring, gardens planted, windows thrown open, children playing in the streets. I helped Mrs. Callahan start a community garden behind the library, turning the soil, planting seeds, watching as green shoots pushed their way toward the sun. My son joined me, his hands clumsy at first, but soon he found a rhythm, laughing as he wiped dirt from his face. We became part of the town's life, attending festivals and concerts, volunteering at the food bank, sharing meals with friends old and new. I watched as my son found his place, as he built connections, as he learned to slow down and savor the moment. I saw him change, not in dramatic ways, but in the small, quiet shifts that mark true growth. One afternoon, as we worked in the garden, he looked up and said, "Thank you, Dad, for showing me that it's never too late to start over." I put a hand on his shoulder, feeling the strength in him, the hope. "We're all just learning as we go," I said. That's the secret. No one has it all figured out. As spring turned to summer, I realized that I was no longer waiting for life to happen. I was living it, fully and without regret. I had found a new home, not just in a place, but in the people around me, in the connections I'd made, in the person I was becoming. My son and I had found our way back to each other, not as parent and child, but as equals, as friends, as fellow travelers on the road of life. Summer in the town was a season of celebration. The days stretched long and golden, the air thick with the scent of cut grass and blooming flowers. Every weekend brought a new event, a street fair, a music festival, a farmer's market overflowing with ripe tomatoes and sweet corn. I found myself swept up in the energy, drawn into the swirl of laughter and music and sunlight. My son and I volunteered to help set up tents for the 4th of July picnic, our hands sticky with lemonade, our faces sunburned and smiling. We joined in the games, the sack races and pie-eating contests, our laughter mingling with the shouts of children and the cheers of neighbors. I watched my son as he moved through the crowd, greeting people by name, sharing stories and jokes, his old reserve melting away in the warmth of community. He seemed lighter, freer, as if he'd shed a weight he'd carried for years. I felt a quiet pride watching him, not for anything he'd accomplished in his career, but for the way he was learning to live, openly, honestly, with joy. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, we sat on the porch of Ruth's house, sipping iced tea and listening to the cicadas. Ruth told stories of her childhood summers, of swimming in the river and catching fireflies in jars. Ed played his harmonica, the notes drifting out into the twilight. My son leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, a contented smile on his face. "Do you ever miss the city?" I asked him quietly. He opened his eyes and shook his head. "Not the way I thought I would. I thought I'd miss the noise, the pace, the feeling of being important. But I don't. I feel more myself here than I have in years." I nodded, understanding. Sometimes it takes losing everything you thought you needed to find what you really want. He looked at me, his expression thoughtful. I used to think I had all the answers. Now I'm just grateful for the questions. We sat in comfortable silence, the sky darkening, the first stars appearing overhead. I thought about the journey that had brought us here, about the pain and the fear and the courage it had taken to start over. I thought about my wife, about the life we'd built together, about the way she'd always believed in second chances. As the summer wore on, I found myself growing stronger, more at ease in my own skin. I took up painting, inspired by the colors of the fields and the ever-changing sky. My son joined a local softball team, his laughter ringing out across the diamond as he slid into home plate. We spent lazy afternoons fishing by the river, our conversations drifting from the past to the future and back again. One afternoon, as we sat on the riverbank, my son turned to me and said, "I used to be afraid of growing old. I thought it meant losing everything. My independence, my purpose, my place in the world. But watching you, seeing how you've built a new life here, I realize it's not about losing. It's about changing. About finding new ways to belong." I smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. "We're all just passing through, son. The trick is to leave something good behind." He nodded, skipping a stone across the water. "I think I finally understand." As the sun dipped below the horizon, we packed up our things and walked home together, the air warm and sweet, the world alive with possibility. I realized that I was no longer haunted by regret or fear. I had found a new way to live, a new way to love, a new way to be. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the journey I'd taken, the house I'd left behind, the life I'd built from scratch, the son I'd found again. I realized that I was exactly where I was meant to be, that every step, every choice, every moment of doubt had led me here. I closed my eyes, listening to the sounds of summer drifting through the open window, and felt a quiet joy settle over me. As summer faded into fall once more, the town seemed to exhale, settling into a slower, gentler rhythm. The days grew shorter, the air tinged with the scent of wood smoke and ripening apples. Leaves turned gold and crimson, swirling down to carpet the sidewalks. I found myself reflecting more often, savoring the quiet moments, morning walks through the mist, evenings spent on the porch with a book, the simple pleasure of sharing a meal with friends. My son and I had grown closer than I ever thought possible. The awkwardness that once lingered between us had been replaced by an easy camaraderie, a sense of mutual respect. We had learned to speak honestly, to listen without judgment, to forgive each other for the things we could not change. One crisp afternoon, we joined Ruth and Ed for a harvest festival in the town square. Stalls overflowed with pumpkins and squash, jars of honey and homemade jam, baskets of apples and pears. Children bobbed for apples, their laughter ringing out above the music of a local band. My son and I tried our hand at the pie baking contest, our efforts more enthusiastic than skilled. We didn't win, but we didn't care. The joy was in the doing, in the flour on our hands and the smiles on our faces. Later, as the sun dipped low and the sky blazed with color, we sat together on a hay bale, sipping hot cider. My son turned to me, his eyes thoughtful. "I used to think I had to have everything figured out by now," he said. "A career, a plan, a perfect life. But I see now that life isn't about having all the answers. It's about being present, about loving the people around you, about finding meaning in the small things." I nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle deep in my bones. We spend so much time chasing after what we think we're supposed to want. Sometimes it takes losing it all to realize what really matters. He smiled, a gentle, grateful smile. "Thank you, Dad, for showing me that it's never too late to change, for giving me the space to find my own way." I reached over and squeezed his hand, pride and love swelling in my chest. "You gave that to yourself, son. I just got out of your way." As the festival wound down, we walked home beneath a sky spangled with stars. The air was cool, the world quiet except for the crunch of leaves beneath our feet. I thought about the journey we'd taken together, about the pain and the healing, the letting go and the holding on. I realized that I was no longer afraid of what lay ahead. I had learned to trust in the unfolding of life, to welcome each new season with an open heart. In the weeks that followed, I continued to find joy in the ordinary. I painted the changing colors of the trees, baked bread with Ruth, played cards with Ed and the other regulars at the community center. My son started teaching a class at the library, sharing his knowledge and experience with anyone who wanted to learn. He found purpose in helping others, in giving back to the community that had welcomed us both. One evening, as we sat by the fire, he turned to me and said, "I think I'm ready to move on. Not away from you, but forward. I want to build something of my own here. I want to put down roots." I felt a surge of emotion, pride, gratitude, a bittersweet ache. "I'm glad," I said softly. "You deserve to be happy. To belong." He smiled, his eyes shining. "I already do. Thanks to you." As the first frost dusted the ground and the days grew ever shorter, I realized that I had found what I'd been searching for, not just a place to live, but a way to be alive. I had learned that it was possible to start over, to find joy and meaning at any age, to build a new life from the pieces of the old. I had learned that love endures, that forgiveness heals, that hope is always waiting, just beyond the horizon. The first snow of winter arrived quietly, dusting the rooftops and blanketing the town in a hush that made every sound seem sacred. I woke early that morning, drawn to the window by the pale light. The world outside looked new again, as if someone had pressed a reset button on the universe. I stood there for a long time, watching the flakes drift down, feeling the familiar ache of nostalgia and the unfamiliar warmth of contentment. My son was already up, making coffee in the small kitchen. He handed me a mug, and we stood together in silence, watching the snow fall, sharing a peace that needed no words. Later that day, we walked through the town, our boots crunching in the fresh snow. The bakery windows glowed with golden light, and the scent of cinnamon and bread drifted out into the street. We stopped in for pastries, greeting the owner by name, and sat at a corner table, steam rising from our cups. My son talked about his plans for the future, how he wanted to buy a little house, maybe start a family of his own someday, how he hoped to give back to the community that had welcomed him so openly. I listened, my heart full, grateful for the man he had become and for the journey that had brought us both here. As the days passed, the town prepared for the holidays. Lights appeared in windows, wreaths on doors, laughter and music spilling from every gathering. Ruth invited us to her home for Christmas dinner, and we joined a table, crowded with friends and neighbors, sharing stories and memories, toasting to the year behind us and the one ahead. I looked around the table and saw not just faces, but lives intertwined. People who had become family, not by blood, but by choice and kindness and shared experience. After dinner, we walked home beneath a sky bright with stars. My son slipped his arm through mine, steadying me on the icy sidewalk. "I'm glad you left, Dad," he said quietly. "I'm glad you showed me how to live, not just survive." I squeezed his hand, feeling tears prick my eyes. "I'm glad you found your way to me. I'm proud of you, son. More than you'll ever know." We reached the motel, and I paused, looking up at the sky. I thought of my wife, of the life we'd built together, of the love that had carried me through every season of loss and change. I felt her presence in the cold air, in the twinkle of the stars, in the laughter that echoed from the houses around us. I whispered a thank you, not just to her, but to the world, to fate, to whatever force had given me the courage to begin again. In the weeks that followed, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. I thought about the day my son told me I was too old to live alone, about the pain and fear that had driven me to leave everything behind. I thought about the loneliness of those first days, the uncertainty, the slow, steady work of building a new life. I thought about the friends I'd made, the lessons I'd learned, the ways I'd changed and grown. I realized that every ending is also a beginning, that every loss makes room for something new. One evening, as I sat by the window, watching the snow fall, I wrote a letter to my son. I told him how proud I was of him, how grateful I was for the time we'd shared, how much I loved him. I told him that life is not a straight line, but a winding path, full of detours and surprises, and that the only thing that matters is how we walk it. Together, with courage and kindness and hope. I sealed the letter and left it on his pillow, knowing that he would find it in the morning. I went to bed that night with a heart full of peace, knowing that I had lived my life on my own terms, that I had found joy and meaning in the simplest things, that I had loved and been loved in return. As the new year approached, I stood once more at the window, watching the world turn white and silent. I thought about all that I had lost and all that I had found. I thought about the house I had left behind, the life I had built from scratch, the son I had found again. I realized that I was not too old to live alone. I was just old enough to know what truly mattered. And so as the clock struck midnight and the world outside erupted in celebration, I raised a glass to the journey, to the people who had walked beside me, to the love that had carried me through. I raised a glass to myself, to the courage it took to begin again, to the wisdom that comes only with age and loss and hope. I raised a glass to the future, whatever it might hold, knowing that I was ready for whatever came next.